Hello, everyone. Jared Blanian here again with Sacktown Talks, having a great show for you today. We have Assemblymember Jose Medina joining us. Back to the legislature. How you doing, Jose? And thanks for joining us.
Very good. Good to be here with you.
Yes, kind of an exciting week. You guys started back at the legislature on Monday. I guess after that month-long recess, can you kind of tell us how it feels to be back and kind of what you're working on this week?
Well, it's very good to be back. I missed being here in the time that we were gone. And this morning, I presented a bill, AB 1930, in Senate Education Committee. It's a follow-up on CSU and high school, entrance requirements at CSU. A bill that I'm proud to say got out of Senate Ed this morning.
Nice. The past couple of days, there's been kind of news of issues between the Senate and the Assembly with bill counts and things like that. Can you give us an update on kind of how that's going and, how the issue's progressing and moving forward?
Well, this is my 8th year here in the legislature. And I know always as we get close to end of session, both houses, make sure that each house gets the number of bills that they deem proper, and I know that's what we are doing. And in the end, I have confidence that everything will work out as we approach the end of session.
Yeah, beginning of the year, a lot of members had many bills. Had big hopes, and then COVID-19 happened, and everyone had to pare their bill package down. Can you kind of tell us, I guess, what your bill package looked like before it went on the COVID-19 diet, and I guess how it's looking now?
Yes, and I wish I were on the same diet because I could use to lose some of those extra pounds that I gained when I was sitting at home for the last few weeks. But I started with 14 bills, I believe, this year, and I'm down to two out of the 14. But as a chair of higher ed, I get what we're doing and trying to make sure that we hear the most important bills moving forward.
Yeah, earlier you mentioned, the bill that you just got out of committee was at AB 1930. Can you, tell us a little more about that bill and how you got it through, this COVID-specific requirements?
Right. So AB 1930 grew out of CSU's effort last year to add entrance requirement of quantitative reasoning to their entrance requirements. And it was something that K-12 or high schools all over the state had issue with. And as did many civil rights groups, a question of equity and what would be the impact of adding this other year quantitative reasoning to the entrance requirements for CSU. And I very much felt that we did not have enough contact or interaction that CSU didn't with the stakeholders. And for that reason, I wrote the legislation that I got out of committee today that makes sure that that CSU, if it wants to do something like this again, moving forward, will have a lot more interaction with all the stakeholders and the legislature. So I was happy to get it out of committee and ensure that I'll get it out of the Senate floor in the next few weeks as well, and get it to the to the governor's desk.
Very interesting. You just said that you were the chairman of higher ed. Can you, kind of tell us about your background and your road to the legislature and kind of why education is an issue you're so invested in?
Yeah. Well, I am, like many of my colleagues in the legislature and like many Californians, I am a son of immigrants. My parents came to California from Panama, Central America.
Oh, wow.
My father actually came here back in 1948. He came to study. He came to study civil engineering, got his degree at San Jose State, and went back to Panama. And when he went back, he took me and my sister, who had been born a year before me, back home with him. But about 4 years into living in Panama, my mother and father decided to immigrate, to come as immigrants to California, and he did. And by that time, there were three of us, and then there was a fourth.
Wow.
But growing up in California, starting in kindergarten here in California, my parents always told us that education was the way to success. And we all listened to my parents. We all graduated from college. Two of us were teachers, and a third is an attorney. And so education's always been important in my life. And very proud to have been a teacher. Have taught 34 years, retired from teaching before I was elected to the state legislature, have been a school board member, community college trustee, and very much enjoy the work I do here in the legislature, both in education and higher education. And I think that the lesson learned for me was how important education is. And especially, as I said, for first generation students and the immigrant here in the state of California.
Yeah, that's it's a tremendous story, and that's, I guess, a common one we hear with members of the legislature being, families immigrating from another country coming here, and then that first generation born, going on and gaining a higher level of education. We talked to Robert Rivas, and he had a very kind of a similar story. I guess what do you attribute that? I guess that success, that educational success that these immigrant families are able to achieve.
Well, I saw that same thing, and I continue to see that. I saw the same thing as a teacher in the classroom, and even now as a state representative. I just read the story of a young girl in the high school where I taught, Riverside Poly High School. And she came older than I did. She came as a middle school student. And I just read her story yesterday, how she was going back and forth across the California-Mexico border when she was a middle school student. And then her family moved from the border to Riverside. And how she was able to achieve with the help of counselors and teachers at the very high school where I taught, Riverside Poly High School, and is now going to be in the fall class at UCLA.
Wow.
So it continues, right? We saw it in the past. I saw it in the classroom. It goes on today. And I having come from that same background, I know that parents who sacrifice so much to bring their families to this country, to bring their families to California, do that mostly because they hope and anticipate a better life for their children, even though they may have to work harder for themselves, but they see a better future for their children. And I see that, over and over again. I'm talking to you here from the Residence Inn, and right here at the Residence Inn, a woman who, housekeeper here, her daughter just accepted into UC Davis. And she shared with me a couple of days ago that it is her daughter's hope to become a doctor. And I shared with her how possible that is and how we are seeing that, as I am seeing that at the UCR School of Medicine over and over again. So I guess that's what we call the American dream,
right?
The California dream, and it is happening all over. I'm very proud that this year Latinos make up the biggest entering class at UC for the first time ever.
Wow. So it reflects our population finally. I guess an interesting thing with COVID is it's really exposed, I guess, certain inequities that our society has had. And, we've just had a great conversation about, repealing Prop 209, and, you guys have done the work and put this measure on the ballot to repeal Prop 209. I guess, how do you see that, working moving forward and I guess helping these minority families achieve success in the educational realm?
Well, as well as we've done, I know we can do better. I mentioned that my brother is an attorney. My brother was a graduate of high school here in Carmichael, and then Sac State, and then went on to UC Berkeley Law, practicing law now. But my brother would share with me that when he was in law school, and he's 10 years younger than I am, that, or he would share with me that if he were to give me the book of Latino grads from UC Berkeley Law, that it wouldn't be that thick, unfortunately. So I was already in teaching when UC repealed affirmative action, and then the state of California followed the next year, repealing affirmative action statewide. And I saw the devastating effect that had, especially in the professional schools, in the schools of medicine and the law schools in California. And it was a step back. And with everything we've seen in this past year, I'm very hopeful that the voters will pass it on the ballot.
Yeah, another piece of legislation that you have that's pretty interesting. One of your two bills left over, AB, what is it, 331?
331.
Right, in kind of on the similar line, requiring ethnic studies. Kind of why is this something that you picked up on, and why do you think this is so important to add to the curriculum?
Well, we started our discussion with the importance of education, and that is still the reason why this bill is so important. Because for students to succeed in school, and I see this as a teacher, as I said, 34 years in the classroom, and I taught all grades. I taught from elementary to junior high to high school. For students to succeed, they have to see themselves in that education process. Unfortunately, I did not see myself in K-12 when I was going through California schools back in the early 1960s. I didn't, as I remember, learning to read. I remember my little readers, and there was no diversity in them. And then as I moved through the grades, went on to high school, I did not see anyone who looked like me, or did I see Native Americans or African Americans very much in any of the textbooks. I loved history, and I didn't find it in the history books. And then when I went on to college, and I was able to take classes like I did in Chicano studies and ethnic studies, all of a sudden I learned what I had missed before. And it gave me a whole different perspective. And I took that perspective with me when I became a teacher. A couple of days ago, I ran across an editorial that a young woman in San Diego, 19-year-old student at Stanford, wrote to the San Diego Union Tribune. And in that editorial, she talks about the kind of almost aha moment that students in ethnic studies have. And it's like a light goes on and they see themselves, and all of a sudden they become empowered by what they are presented and what they are able to learn about, and they become engaged. And so studies show, a study out of Stanford, that all students, regardless of their race or ethnicity, do better if they are exposed to those classes. And GPA has gone up, attendance rates have gotten better. And I saw that firsthand when I taught ethnic studies and Chicano studies at Riverside Poly High School.
I guess, how long have you been, working on this bill, and kind of, what was its policy path, and why is it having so much success now than, in the past?
Well, I have been working on this bill for 4 years. It was vetoed 2 years ago by then Governor Jerry Brown, who said in his veto message that students had enough on their plate. So this is the second legislative year that I've introduced the bill. And, there is no doubt that the events of the last few months with Black Lives Matter and the attention that has brought to systemic racism in this country has pushed the bill forward. And I'm very happy to share that throughout the state of California, from Santa Maria, San Diego, Orange County, school districts and young people are demanding that these kind of classes and ethnic studies be included in the curriculum.
And I guess, how do you envision, going off of Governor Brown's veto message, how do you envision, fitting this into the existing curriculum?
Yeah. Well, I say that, and I found that students are much smarter than sometimes we give them credit for. And so, in other words, students are smart, and they see what we don't say. And, I've never met a more honest group of people than young people. They're
right,
very open and tell you what they think. Right. And so they are smart enough to know that, hey, they're not being valued, that their parents are not being valued, that their culture is not being valued. If all they see, if all they are taught is one narrow perspective, one narrow view of history, they're smarter and they get it. And I would argue that, that is what pushes some students out of school. And ethnic studies does the opposite. It engages students, especially, I've seen, I give you one hand, one student, right? One student who may have been, and Anna says the same thing, that the ethnic studies classroom is a different space. And for them to come into this classroom where they are embraced and accepted for just who they are. So I was making reference to one student who I had years ago. He was probably involved in some activities that he shouldn't have been. After school, Latino. We're still friends, and he still thanks me for the class that we have. But as some kids need sports, and it's sports that keeps them engaged in school. Ethnic studies does that same kind of thing in a different way.
Right.
But it takes the whole individual, and gives them a way of looking even at themselves. It makes them active learners. It makes them, as some people have said, scholars themselves. And it gives them a place even where they feel that they are completely welcome, accepted.
Right. That's an interesting point. You were talking about that student who, when they got to college, they had this aha moment. I remember experiencing that myself. When you start, reading different, visions of history or different perspectives of history, you get an entirely different picture. How much of these ethnic studies, classes or requirements can actually be fit into existing curriculum, and just requiring that different perspectives of history are incorporated into the base curriculum?
Right. So my bill, AB 331, requires one semester class. And in that one semester class, which is 18 weeks, usually a semester, we're looking at four basic groups, African American, Latino, Native American, and Asian American. So in that 18 weeks, you're looking at four different groups. It's not going to be an exhaustive study of any of these four groups, but it's a start. It's a beginning. And again, as the one young lady from San Diego said, or people, a student who I just read about in Orange County, it may be the first time that they're exposed to an African American novelist The first time they hear about Toni Morrison or about Raisin in the Sun, Lorraine Hansberry, or Bless Me Ultima by Rodolfo Anaya, or some of the heroes of, even the civil rights movement or the Chicano movement, or the first time they hear about Angel Island, or, something that is in the news quite a bit today, what was the treatment of Native Americans in California, in the California missions. So this may be the first time. And it won't be, as I say, exhaustive, but it will make a difference. And I see how it makes a difference in students' lives. My students remind me that all the time when they see me, and young people like Anna, who is now a second-year student at Stanford University, said it very eloquently in her editorial at the San Diego Union Tribune.
Yeah, I guess one common, complaint we hear, about adding curriculum is I guess, why does it need to be in its own class versus, just fitting in it with other existing history or social science classes? Can you, elaborate on why you think this should be a standalone, rather than pieced within other subjects?
Well, Dr. Shirley Weber, who is a author of a similar bill to make ethnic studies a graduation requirement within CSU, and who is the co-author with me on 331. And I have had a chance to talk about that in the past year as we're moving through. And we both agree that it has been 50 years. It's been 50 years since the field of ethnic studies was first, came into existence at San Francisco State. And in those 50 years, we haven't seen a lot. The textbooks haven't changed that much in either history in the high school, which I taught U.S. history, or the literature classes, English classes, again in the high school. Nor was it made a graduation requirement in the colleges. So in the past 50 years, where a whole lot of knowledge has been created, scholarship and research created in the past 50 years, we haven't seen it. And I know I am 67 years old, and I don't want to wait another 50 years and see that, it didn't change.
Right.
So I agree with students. I agree with young people that the time is now.
Yeah, I guess, in your experience of teaching, ethnic studies, and, as you said, you haven't really seen much change in the textbooks in the last 50 years. I guess, what changes have you seen, in the curriculum of ethnic studies within the past, 30 years?
Well, as I may have shared, I was a history major in Latin American studies major, and then got my master's in history, both at UC Riverside. And so I made reference to the scholarship. That is how knowledge is created, is through research and scholarship. And we've had, I would say, a boom of scholarship that's been created in the last 50 years. That as I went into teaching, I was a bilingual teacher in the elementary school. And I remember, as we first talked about multicultural education, some schools would put on a Cinco de Mayo festival, and we'd have ballet folklorico at the school. And we could say, okay, we've done that. And now all of a sudden, we're being bicultural. So it's not, so maybe that was the start, or maybe that's, was well intended, but that wasn't enough. Now we know that knowledge is deep, and so that even in perhaps in every field of knowledge, there could be incorporation also of the achievements and contributions of people of color in this country in the different fields. And I think that's come because of work by scholars. And so I think that's, partly some of the changes that have been brought about, that it runs very, very deep.
Interesting. I guess, something that has come up very recently in the past, 6 months because of COVID-19 is this subject of distance learning. And now that, we're about to start the school year again, I guess kind of what are you seeing in your district on the issue of distance learning? Is there a gap between schools and students, having, I guess, the ability to distance learn, having the equipment, and I guess the
Uh,
internet connectivity to achieve this? I guess, can you elaborate on that and how, I guess, distance
sure.
learning is going in your
Yeah.
community, and how you think being a teacher of how it replaces actual instruction.
Right. I know that it presents a huge challenge, right? A huge challenge to school districts, to teachers. In my own community, I have heard from different school districts that it's not an even playing field on just having the ability to access um, distance learning. In other words, there are still school districts in my 61st Assembly District that don't have enough of what I'm using right now, an iPad. Um, that there are still households, right, who may not have it. And I know that school districts in my own district are making tremendous effort to alleviate that and have, given out many thousands of computers, iPads. Also, the part of connectivity is an issue. But then even within K-12 and going into higher education, again, there is not There's not a level playing field, or it's a challenge, to all households. Uh, it is a challenge to all households and to parents how they can, perhaps work at home and still monitor their own children's education and participation. But it becomes an even more challenge in certain households. Um, if you have, several children, uh, mother maybe is not there to supervise. So I am leery, and I am somewhat fearful that what we talk about, the achievement gap, will increase during this time of distance learning. So it is certainly something that I intend to pay attention to, and that we all need to pay attention to, so that we can try to reduce that achievement gap as much as we can.
Right. Riverside County is a very large county, very diverse county, in terms of where population is. I guess kind of what are the challenges of getting back to in-person schooling there, as you might have a rural part of the county that has very low to no cases that may be able to go in person, but with such a large county and county-wide restrictions, it's kind of a one-size-fit-all approach, it seems. I guess, has there been any
Um,
discussions within, I guess, your district about people wanting to go in person and feeling that they're ready to have in person learning, but they can't because of, I guess, some of these restrictions?
right. Well, I was paying attention and watching the past school board meeting. Riverside Unified School District went on to midnight, talking about the different options and the parents' different options, students' different options. Um, it's not, I don't see any easy solutions. Um, I my high school where I taught is across the street from where I live, and I was there early on when schools were let out, when schools went on break, and they were passing out the meals. Um, we've talked about it's going to take more resources. Uh, we cannot ask schools to do more with less, and so I know that schools are looking at different options of how perhaps they can, when they reopen, how can they reopen safely, uh, going back to things that when we didn't have enough schools and there were not enough schools being built, we had morning session and afternoon session, but those are all very challenging, and I have watched my fellow teachers trying to develop their lesson plans. And I think Riverside Unified is going to begin school in the next 2 weeks. And teachers are working very hard, staying up late, doing professional development, trying to get their lessons done to go online. But I know how difficult it is for school districts and the challenges that it is for parents as well.
Yeah. Basically they've I guess given a roadmap of how I guess certain school districts can open and close. I guess in your county, I guess how realistic is it to see I guess in-person learning this year, or do you think it's a way off?
Well, and then if I might add, we have the University of California at Riverside also
Right.
there in my district. And I know that UCR is going to have a very limited offering of in-person classes. And they may have even a little bit more flexibility than the K-12. But I know that the medical school may have some on-site, on-hand classes. I know science labs at UCR may meet, but it's going to be a very small percentage of the classes offered. But they are facing some of the same challenges as K-12. With teachers, faculty, and the challenges to their safety and health.
I guess Chairman of Higher Education, is this something that I guess you guys have had a committee hearing on or looked at? I guess how a university, with dormitories and people living together, I guess how that would work and function in this kind of COVID-19 situation.
Right. Well, I have been keeping in touch closely with the chancellors of UC. Early on, CSU announced that they would only be doing distance learning. So they early on decided that. I think community colleges decided that very quickly. I think UC, in talking to chancellors, we're more hopeful, and we're looking at different ways that they could bring students on campus. Still, my understanding that some students will be on campus, even though they'll be distance learning. I have one student from my district. He's going to be attending UC Berkeley. He's a foster child. He's very excited to be going to Berkeley. But he's 18. He's moving on, and I know that he will be living in a dormitory at UC Berkeley. And there could be a lot of thousands more students like him. Who maybe go to campus even while still distance learning.
Okay, so I guess students will have housing or an ability to go to the universities, just not, I guess, be in class.
Right, and at UCR we have I think a whole group of foreign students who have stayed in student housing dormitories even throughout this whole period.
Okay, interesting. One thing, we see being discussed a lot is, I guess, the quality of education these students are getting in this distance learning situation.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like they'll have maybe a year of distance learning, if you account for last spring and this fall. Some people are thinking their kids are going to have to start a grade over or kind of redo stuff.
Right.
I guess kind of what are you seeing, I guess, on the quality of the education these kids are getting? And I guess, how are we going to know the results of what we're teaching our kids down the road?
Well, I do think that it is something that we'll have to monitor, right? I don't think that anyone would challenge the idea that it would be best, or that students do better. I don't think anyone challenges that with face-to-face interaction. I've heard even from college professors say that if they were in a class, they can see in the face of the student whether maybe he gets it, doesn't get it. The professor calls and, does, I think, like I did in a classroom and teachers do in a classroom, who to call on in a discussion and how to try to bring in someone who maybe hangs back more, and the outgoing student, you want to let everybody have a say or everybody participate in the discussion. And things like that are just more difficult. And that's what I heard a professor say, that with distance learning won't be as easy. The interaction among students, right? Or as they've said in higher education, students themselves have said that a lot of the learning that happens in colleges, university, may happen outside the classroom. The discussions that happen, to and from class, after class, those are not going to happen. So both at the university and in the K-12, I think we're going to have to pay close attention to how well this distance learning is working.
One concept that has been floated out there, and some people's opinions is, we should just halt all schooling until basically we can have in-person attendance, and then start again in January, where hopefully there's a vaccine or some therapeutic where everyone can be in person. I guess, why is it important to I guess trudge forward with distance learning than, I guess just stopping until we can do in-person instructions?
Right. Well, I would say as a parent, a teacher, that would be drastic, and we certainly can't do that. So perhaps distance learning is not perfect, as we pointed out, but especially for young people, you can't stop. I don't think child's development, if you it's not a switch. I'm sure it's not a switch that we can just turn on and off. Say, okay, we're going to take a year break, and then a year later we're going to start over again. I don't think that's good for the well-being of young people. College students, you hear some talk about, well, maybe, they'll do that gap year, right, and take a year off and then wait and see. I can see that more for college-age young people. With K-12, no. I am sure it would be hugely detrimental to all learning if anything like that drastic were to happen. I think developmentally, and I'm not a psychologist, it needs to happen, continue to happen,
right?
Without gaps.
Well said. I guess to kind of touch upon a subject earlier, kind of, I guess, your knowledge of ethnic studies, there's a lot of thirst, a lot of interest right now in ethnic studies. I guess there's some books out there that you would recommend to our listeners that they check out. Well,
sure. I mentioned a couple of novels. Some of those are my favorite. The ones I mentioned, Bless Me Ultima by Rodolfo Anaya. He actually just passed away this past year, in the last few months. Rodolfo Anaya, and his first book was called Bless Me Ultima, a book that I very highly recommend. I used in my classroom, Raisin in the Sun, as I mentioned, by Lorraine Hansberry, first African-American playwright to reach Broadway. And I remember thinking when I first started using that book, maybe it's, a book, a play written in the 1960s and not as timely as it should be. And now I've heard and watched different adaptations of the same book and the same play. And I'm assured by my colleagues that it is just as timely today as it was back in the early 1960s when she wrote it. There's one book that I would mention, James Bank, Teaching Strategies for Ethnic Studies, that I used quite a bit. And I think that's a very valuable one. Also, anything written by Ronald Takaki, professor at UC Berkeley. He had a book, Strangers from a Different Shore, is one. But anything written by Ron Takaki is very valuable. Ron Tataki actually started by teaching African American studies at UCLA before he went on to Berkeley, and a pioneer, I would say, in ethnic studies.
Okay, interesting. We'll have to check those out. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I know you got to run, but I guess you have any parting words of wisdom with us before you go?
Well, I thank you for having me on the program, and I look forward to AB 331 moving forward in the legislature, and I know the governor will do the right thing and sign it so that young people throughout the state of California can get some very valuable, much needed information in their lives, and it will change their lives.
No, definitely. A fresh perspective is definitely needed and necessary. And thanks for bringing this to our attention, and wish you the best of luck.
Thank you. Thanks again.
Thanks, Jose. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.